All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's time, and I like to start on time, so we're going to start on time. So I'm thrilled to see this many people here to talk about a contract appendix. So it's fantastic. My expectations were low. I was in a session earlier, and there were 3 of us. And so I am tickled to see so many people. Anyway, my name is Robert Smith. I am the system-wide IT policy director, and I project managing active the update to Appendix DS, which we're going to talk about. And we're thrilled. And I have 2 co-presenters. Ian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Ian Crew from UC Berkeley. I'm an architect on the team that runs the cloud collaboration services for the campus.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Trappler. Really appreciate you all coming today. I'm Associate Director for IT Strategic Sourcing for the UC system.
Great. Okay, so disclaimer. And first to let you know, which I'm going to make a note to the conference promoters, they're recording these sessions. So there should be something up here telling you that. So I'm telling you that. This is being recorded. So don't say something or ask something that you don't want to be recorded, because it is being recorded. So and if anyone comes in late, I'm going to tell them, oh, by the way, welcome. You're being recorded. Anyway, so this isn't officially cleared, right? So it didn't go through public communications, PR, legal. So it's our opinions and insights. Welcome, come on in. We are recording this, so anything you say will be a permanent record. And then one caveat, it's less of a caveat now. The project isn't done, but last night I got the final approval. So the document itself, Appendix DS, is now approved by the stakeholders, and we're ready to roll it out. So anyway, we're going to give you some introduction and background. We're going to give you an overview of the agreement document and how things fit together. I'm going to talk about negotiating DS, and we're going to talk about the philosophy, next steps, and we should have time for questions. But we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep it rolling. But you can ask questions along the way too. So I start with a little levity. This is how hackers see their victims. I think often this is how UC looks. This is how our users tend to see the things we ask them to do, right? And so that's, and notice some of these kind of look a little plasticky, and they point that out to us like, well, but you're having me do this, but it doesn't really do anything. This is how executives see what we're doing. So, we got a couple of CISOs here. So, this is how the dean says, well, of course, you've got 3 Star Destroyers out there protecting me, right? I'm completely safe. What could go wrong? All right, and this is how we see ourselves, right? So we see ourselves as the good Jedi of the world. All right, so why did we update Appendix DS? So Appendix DS is Appendix Data Security, and one of the reasons we wanted to update it was to align with new IS3. So IS3 is our system-wide security policy. Last September, it was approved by the president, so it's in force. And it actually talks about managing supply chain risk, and it uses a vocabulary. And so we had to update Appendix DS to align with that vocabulary, and also the approach that's now enshrined in policy to manage supply risk. And then we also, we're engaging suppliers more and more. So we're using supply chain more and more. We're asking suppliers to do more things. And so suppliers are part of our cybersecurity risk management strategy, so we need a more friendly way. The other thing is, historically, we came and told suppliers, do these things, which doesn't make sense. Good suppliers should be telling us what they do to manage supplier risk. So we flipped that. And then we wanted to reduce the burden. Some people will argue, maybe correctly, we've shifted the burden so that of what CISO offices are doing. And we're going to talk more about this. But one of the things to do is to lighten the burden to get the same outcome. And then to implement better, good best practices. Welcome, we got more chairs. Come on in. Just for all you new people, this is being recorded, just so you know. All right. Every location had a chance to participate in creating this new document. So it wasn't me. It wasn't a couple of people. It was a system-wide approach. So academic locations participated, health locations participated, privacy participated, ethics, compliance, and audit services participated. Enterprise Architect Group participated. OGC, the lawyers, Office of General Counsel participated in mass, but you would expect that. System-wide purchasing participated. That's Tom Trepler and his team. And then system-wide security participated, which was in part me. And then the other executive sponsored, David Rusting, my boss. So the executive sponsors were security, because we're managing supplier cybersecurity risk, purchasing, because this gets attached to purchasing contracts, and legal, because it's a legal document. So those were the three stakeholders. Okay, then the feedback on drafts, all the academic locations gave feedback in a substantive way, except for A&R. 3 of the 4 health locations gave feedback, and then all of the core groups at UCOP, and come on in.
Come on in, there's room.
Yeah, there's room. And you are being recorded. So anyway, this was truly a system-wide effort. Everybody had a chance to participate in this document. So anyway, that's sort of the introduction. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Trepler, hand him the fancy clicker, and let him take us through the next section.
Wow, great to have such a full room. One thing that Robert, I don't think mentioned, was that as of last night, I read that email to say that the 3rd executive sponsor sign off has been cleared. So that is a big hurdle for us. And my name is on there, right? But I'm getting a lot of input from a lot of procurement folks, both at OP and locally. So just trying to funnel that information. And I got my okay to give that sign off just last week. So we're moving ahead very well. It's good news. So I just want to talk a little bit about how Appendix DS fits into the larger procurement document space, right? And you'll see as we go through, it's largely set up to be very modular. So it can be done on a case-by-case basis, but there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and Appendix DS doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So at a high level, there's a package of 7 documents. I'll call that last one a vision at the moment, where we have the overarching agreement, statement of work, which talks about the deal points, terms and conditions, which is more legalese, Appendix DS, which we're talking about today, Appendix Business Associate Agreement, when PHI is involved, Appendix GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, for when European subject data is involved, and a privacy appendix is evolving, but a bit behind the curve due to staffing changes. I'm getting that right now. But so at a high level, right, the agreement-purchasing is really the umbrella of it all, and everything else is just a piece of that agreement that we do with the supplier, right? So this is the one that ties everything together. It's a fairly high-level document. It's talking about dates and durations. It's talking about notices, and it's probably its main thing is when there are amendments or revisions or edits to the other documents, we capture them in this as sort of a cover document, right? And as well as stating the order of precedence in the whole package, right? So 2 of the documents say something conflicting, right? Which one prevails, right? So we have then statement of work, which tends to be confusing. I will say I inherited this nomenclature. Statement of work is more commonly like, we are going to hire someone to do something very specific for us. There are deliverables, timelines, etc. When we do a system-wide agreement, it's more about the specific deal points, right? What is this agreement about? What does this product do? What is the scope and scale of the license agreement? Who are the eligible users? That sort of thing, as well as pricing, because usually we're getting some sort of system-wide special discount pricing and service level agreements for when they apply, right? So if it's a cloud service or other performance-oriented purchase that we're making, right? In terms of conditions of purchase, right? This is the lawyer stuff, pretty much, right? These apply to pretty much all UC purchases, IT or not. You know, there are cases where they are maybe not applicable or negotiated in an IT environment, so we take care of those there. But this is the kind of stuff that, you know, general warranties, compliance with UC policy, compliance with laws, audit, force-majeure, limitation of liabilities, that sort of attorney stuff, right? But because these all interplay, and because this is supposed to be more generic, in the process of revising Appendix DS, we came to see that certain clauses were actually fairly generic and not specific to security. So some of those will be moving into the terms and conditions. And so Appendix DS is being revised in parallel with the terms and conditions, and in parallel with the business associate agreement, which I'll get to in another slide. So Appendix DS, we'll talk about this in greater detail today, but just note, right, this is called the appendix because it is just a component of the master agreement. It's not a document that gets signed by itself, right? It's just the security language pertinent to the purchasing agreement. And you'll see a variety of appendices now that we have, right? Appendix Business Associate Agreement, also not a freestanding document, part of the purchasing agreement. Oftentimes, and in this process, right, we've had to make sure that it synchronizes with Appendix DS. Various notice timelines and triggering data notice triggering timelines had to be kind of synchronized. But BAA has to come into play additionally when there's PHI that's being stored, processed, or transmitted by the supplier, right? So personal health information, right? So not just other sensitive data, which would trigger DS, but specifically PHI. And again, that one is going to come out with a new version in parallel with our release. Appendix GDPR for data.
General data
I
protection.
think I got it wrong there, didn't I? I got a typo. General data protection regulation. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I thought I spelled it out. So also an appendix, but just like where BAA comes into play if there's PHI involved, if we will be using that supplier to store, process, transmit, or use. So in fact, this is collect, access, store, use, but it's kind of the same concepts. Data related to an EU citizen, someone who's located in the EU, or an EU citizen when they're not in the EU, right? So this is a newer construct. This rule went into effect about a year ago. It was added to Appendix DS at that time, sort of temporarily. They basically said, we're going to add 5 pages to the Appendix DS, all about GDPR. So I think that was sort of a quick and dirty solution at the time. And now that's actually, as of April, that's been pulled out into its own freestanding document, which I think is a good thing. And just that, I know, everyone loves contracts and legalese, but just any questions on how that package works? Yeah, Sam.
So a question has come up before whether or not we can attach DS to a purchase order instead of negotiating a full contract.
I mean, there could be a case by case scenario where maybe that's enough. I would generally think it would be unwise, right? Because I'm thinking, right, it's going to be cloud or professional services, because for sure DS will come into play. I mean, if it's some pure hardware where the supplier is not going to have any access to sensitive information, right?
It's software as a service that's relatively straightforward licensing.
I would say at minimum, we're agreeing to their terms and conditions, whether it's attached or not. I would say that I guarantee without reading any supplier terms and conditions that they are objectionable and are contrary to university policy. I don't even have to read them. I know there's going to be at least a couple of songs. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and you keep your fingers crossed and you run with it. But on a bigger scale where sensitive data is involved, I think that would generally be a bad idea. Would be I would never be able to do that on system wide, local decisions can be made locally, right? And risk postures vary by location. Any other questions on all the agreement package? All right, then I'll hand off to you.
These chairs make me flash back to junior high. Okay, whoops, wrong direction. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about negotiating Appendix DS, and really what it comes down to is we're saying to the supplier, tell us about the awesome job you're already doing with cybersecurity, and commit to doing that awesome job. You let us know when something goes wrong and keep us up to date. It's really pretty much that simple. And the key thing here is that it doesn't have to be necessarily our exact comma for comma Appendix DS language. If things are covered in the contract, that it's substantially similar legal language, that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly what we say, so long as a lot of these points are covered. And that's really a large part of the reason that we did this revision of Appendix DS, is to make it a little bit more modular, a little bit less one size fits all. An example there is, as we look at both the scale and sensitivity of the data, there isn't just this blanket requirement for, I think it was like $5 million in cyber liability coverage. There are different levels now in the Appendix DS, so that it can be a little bit more realistic in terms of what the data actually is. For example, if you're putting something up for a public website or whatever, there probably isn't as much risk as if you're storing PHI. So does that really need the same cyber liability? Like I said, if you are not using Appendix DS and just basing it on the supplier terms, Appendix DS provides a good checklist for, are these things covered in the existing terms? And I think that might answer a little bit of the question earlier about, can we just attach Appendix DS to a purchase order? Yeah, if maybe not, but if they're covering much of the same thing in their standard T's and C's, that might be sufficient. We might not need to actually attach a copy of our Appendix DS. Also, I want to acknowledge that really the whole Appendix DS is written for small, medium to large suppliers. We realize that the Googles, the Microsofts, the IBMs, et cetera, we're going to negotiate those huge contracts, all the way through anyway. And so to say to them, oh, we have to attach exactly this Appendix DS, that's of course going to get negotiated. And so that's a little bit out of scope for this agreement.
Well, I just would say, even if you're in that scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's a good, if you were going to say this. Sorry.
No, please.
It's a good checklist, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Hey, do they have language that's addressing what's in RDS in a similar fashion or sufficient fashion, right? Just to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, have they covered all the bases in their own contract, right? So it's just a good checklist to have your mind.
And going back to what Tom said earlier, there is local control, so each campus's CISOs can approve an alternative if there is a special case where it doesn't really make sense. Certain clauses really don't make sense for whatever the special case is. The local CISO can actually approve an exception to that. So I'll pause there, and any questions?
Who's
Yeah.
the negotiator?
That would be purchasing, that would be the local purchasing folks.
Typically, that's the last
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
But I understand in some locations, CISOs get involved in those dialogues. Which
It would also probably depend a whole lot on the level of sensitivity of the data. So yeah, so the local information security folks would probably need to get involved if it was very highly sensitive data. Something less sensitive, it might just be the purchasing.
For system-wide, it's myself and my team, but again, locally, things like that.
So when looking at a vendor's contract and you're trying to tease out the information in the vendor's contract, would you be looking at the way at their confidentiality? Would you be looking at storage? what specifics would you look at when you're trying to tease out their data security requirements as opposed to using LMDS?
I think actually that's going to get a little bit into what Robert's talking about in the next few. No, it's a great segue actually, because I'm about to hand it over to him. But really, it is coming back to having them show us that they're managing their systems and services well. So the industry standard for things is something like a SOC 2 report, which shows how they manage their data centers and how they roll out new releases and code and what they do to make sure that's secure. There is a, I hope I'm not taking half of your presentation, Robert, but there's a higher ed wide tool called the HECVAT, Higher Education Cloud Vendor Assessment Tool, that is something that was developed by a consortium of Internet 2 and EDUCAUSE and a few others that allows a vendor to do sort of one big security review that answers many of the questions that higher ed might have about good practices in terms of good security practices. When you see the new Appendix DS, we've done it, it's pretty modular, so it sort of tackles one topic at a time, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't even play one on TV, and I actually understand it. It's written in really pretty comprehensible language. I think that Robert and the lawyers who were working on making a lot of the wording made it very, very easy to understand. So I think it in itself provides a pretty good guide.
What was that called again?
The HECVAT, the HECVAT, Higher Education Cloud Vendor Assessment Tool.
I would just say to Liz's question too, I mean, in the ideal world, right, you go to that supplier and say, what is your security policy, practices, procedures, right?
Yeah.
And if they say, what's that? Then that's right.
Yeah, in that case, you might want to.
But otherwise, they might, hopefully they're perhaps they have a website that's pointing to a high level what they're doing. Obviously, it's not going to have granular stuff, public fashion, but then you look at that and say, okay, if you promise to keep doing that, in concert with our security experts, then we are comfortable with that, right? So you can take that approach. Hopefully they have materials already that are summarized some action.
The other thing,
and third-party certifications to prove that it's correct. Right?
And the other thing I'll say is getting your local security folks involved early in the process. They like it a lot better that way generally, that if you talk with them early on and say, does this vendor seem like they're doing the right sorts of things, it's a lot easier to catch at that point than it is of, oh, we're signing the agreement tomorrow, would you please have a look? Not that ever happens, right?
Every time.
Yeah. So I will hand it over to Robert to go through a little bit more of the detail.
All right, thank you, Ian. All right, and then a couple of people joined. This is being recorded, so I just want to let you know. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of DS. So, so one of the things is that security is a dialogue, right? It isn't, you don't just say do X and you're done, right? So the idea was to make it a collaborative and cross-functional approach. We talked about adopting the vocabulary. The key things are institutional information and IT resources. So gone is the concept of non-public information or sensitive or restricted. It talks about institutional information and IT resources and protection level. So it uses the IS3 vocabulary. Before, it only talked about breach. It didn't tell us about security incidents. Well, breach is a legal determination that's made late in the process, which is too late in today's security world. So we have added language for incidents. As Ian and Tom noted, we use much simpler language. So I would like to say it's easy to understand, but it's certainly easier to understand. And we try to reduce the number of individual requirements because it's no matter how you look at it, like if you look at any framework, the light framework is about 100 requirements and the comprehensive framework is like 300 to 400 requirements. It doesn't really matter what you look at, you're in that range. So before we grabbed a handful and said, we're going to try to micromanage a handful. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for us to manage 100. So we tell the supplier, tell us what you do to manage cyber risk. We need to mature as an organization. I'll just throw that gauntlet down, right? If a supplier comes to us and says, I don't have a security plan, the reality is probably not a supplier we want to deal with. That's not true today, but as we move over time, it should be. We're going to be doing some things to help in the interim. All right. The other thing we did, so when we went, before we wrote a word, we went to the CISOs and to other key stakeholders and said, tell us all the requirements. So this went through a formal project management approach. We had a project plan that was approved. We had a set of requirements that was approved. And so everything the CISOs said they wanted, we worked to address. And we were able to do that substantively. Sometimes there was conflict. So CISO A says, I want this. CISO B says, I want this. And they don't match. So we tried to find the harmonious point. So we did make DS focus on cyber risk management. So that was one of the universal complaints from the CISOs. There's all kinds of things in here that have nothing to do with cyber risk. So all of those things, all of them are gone. So they're not in DS anymore. So what's in DS are the things that align with the responsibility to manage cyber risk for the location. And then we made all the agreements align. Tom talked about that. And then we took things like insurance indemnification, which were two big pain points, and we moved them out of DS. So they're now in the terms and conditions. So because a CISO or a security team can't negotiate indemnification. They have no authority at all, right? There's just no way to do it. Same thing with insurance requirements, because that's managing a different kind of risk. In insurance, though, one of the things that we were asked for is, can you give us a sliding scale so low-risk suppliers have low insurance requirements and high-risk suppliers have high? So we do have a sliding scale of 4 buckets of cyber insurance. So we were able to make that compromise with the help of risk services. Okay, I just talked about that. So for these, again, the target is these small and medium-sized suppliers. So the goal was to make it something that is more likely to be acceptable than redline. So we think we've accomplished that. Does that mean, I mean, you're going to go out and start negotiating these and you're going to say, well, we had to change this and this and this. And correct, that's going to happen. But if you compare it to the old one, what we've done is try to flip it to the other side. We've made the language very clear that the supplier is responsible. So like Ian mentioned, hey, supplier, tell us what you do. Okay, that's what your response, that's good enough. Do that thing. Okay. So you want to do this part? All right.
Tag team it.
We'll tag team it.
So this is the part where it's for those of you who know and love the old Appendix DS by heart, where did my favorite clause go? So these are the ones we've been talking about where, hey, we're looking through it, we're rewriting, and we're realizing, well, this is not really focused on security. This should go somewhere else, right? So the old Article 5, compliance with applicable laws, fair information practices, principles, and UC policies has now been combined with Article 7. So that actually didn't leave. We did a mashup, right?
Right, but moved it to terms and conditions.
Yeah. Okay. Article 10, notification of correspondence, communication concerning institutional information.
All of these move to T's and C's.
Thank you. I'm forgetting to read the heading here. Legal assistance, right? Attorney's fees, right? These are not specific to security, indemnification, and additional insurance. The latter two, there are nuances that make them sort of specific, but they're part of a larger picture, so we decided to move those to the terms and conditions. Anyone so passionate about the old one that you want to talk deeper on any of these? These are sort of heads up, right?
Just say thank you.
Okay, so then the old one used to be Appendix DS and P for a while, right? But so it was data security and privacy, and everyone said, well, what'd you do with the privacy stuff? And the fact is, right, that other than the word privacy in the title and one link to a dead lame. There really was nothing about privacy in there, and so that's why it goes back to there's being contemplated once the privacy team is staffed back up again to do a privacy appendix separately. But nothing was actually lost in that process. And we just moved to the SOW, right? Hey, if there is a requirement for a privacy policy, right, we put it there. So these are the ones that are gone. You know, took me a while, but I became very used to the definition of non-public information from the old Appendix DS. So that's gone and replaced with institutional information. Similar scope of definition, but a more meaningful one. Requirement to follow IS3. That was, in fact, the aha moment as Robert and I were talking one day, and new IS3 policy was released, and we're like, yeah, the DS links to IS3 and IS2, and those are both dead links now. We probably should think about rewriting this thing, right? So those are gone. There was a specific, almost an entire page on PCI, so payment card industry, credit card data. It was determined that actually was essentially redundant and not necessary, given that we already protect all the other data. And security patches and updates, you know, the idea as well, as we're reviewing the supplier's security plans and practices, right? If they're not doing that, right, that's a problem. So they should be looked at in that regard, as opposed to a freestanding clause on our side. So yeah.
I know in our area, PCI was, or PCI specifically, it was specifically stated that they have to follow the DS. So that's been pushed back, then it's no longer there.
So Robert, you're more expert at this than I am.
Yeah.
Robert became very clear that what we had in there was not necessary.
Right. So that if it's a vendor or a supplier, right, that's what we call them now, suppliers, that handles payment card information on our behalf, our requirement for them is to be PCI compliant, right? So that's all we, in the description of the services, you're offering a PCI compliant service, and this is the evidence that we want from you that you're doing that. That this idea that somehow we could, in a page, proxy for DSS 3. And somehow we knew in advance when we wrote the contract. So a lot of contracts, and I lived this personally when I was at UCR, the vendor would say, well, we're doing this. Well, but you're not PCI, you didn't require us to be PCI compliant. So, but it's our merchant ID, so they had shifted all the risk to us, and that's the wrong way. So in your description of services, it should say PCI compliant to the latest revision, because that's their obligation to do. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. We shouldn't be trying to micromanage that. We should be telling them, you have an obligation to do this, and so go do it. And so that's why it's not needed. And if you read the DSS requirements, there's no requirements on us, right, as the merchant ID holder to somehow contractually implement DSS through our contractual vehicle to the supplier. Right? We just tell the supplier, your job is to be compliant with that. Does that make sense? So that greatly simplifies it. And it also eliminated the other problem, which was what top CISO complaint is PCI was part of every contract. And then people would say, but we're not processing credit cards. Why do we want, here, you can have this chair. I'll move over. I'm actually not going to sit down at this point. So I have my chair. Welcome.
I was going to share we don't have a visual on it yet, but the new DS has what it's called Exhibit 1. And essentially that exhibit there is like a little checklist saying what kind of data is in here, right? So one of the boxes is PCI, there's PHI. So you're basically saying what kind of data is involved, and then there's another set of boxes that says, okay, so since you've checked PCI, that means you agreed to the various underlying PCI regulations without us having to try and restate them. So we're trying to, again, that modular approach, right? And
great.
So
all right. Yep. Back to me for the home stretch. All right. Okay. So what's next? So we're going to complete the final version in issue, as Tom and I mentioned, right? So the final version was approved last night. So we now have to do the annotated version, and we've got to do the training materials, but that whole machine is being revved up. So in Q3, we'll have some other materials, the annotated training and reference material. We're doing intro sessions. So we did one on an ITPS call. If you're not on ITPS, email me, robert.smith@ucop.edu. I will get you on the list. You should be on the list. At Davis, we did a session like this one, except we also turned the pages, and then we're doing this. We're going to do a face-to-face
Did
training.
they record the UC Davis one for people who might want to see the?
We did
page turn?
not.
Okay.
Yep. We're going to do a face-to-face training, one north and one south. So that will be open to everyone involved. So purchasing, legal, IT people, business people, privacy people, compliance people. We're going to try to get everyone in a room from all the locations and do that. The last time DS was rolled out, that they used that model. There were very few things about the last rollout that worked well, but one of the things that worked well was the in-person training. So we're going to do that. I will do a webinar, which I will record. It'll be like an hour 15, something that a new person could actually digest, and then emphasize separately, right? So not part of this project, separately. So everyone, I'm being recorded, so separate from this project. So UC San Francisco stepped forward and said, you know, you gave us what we asked for. Thank you very much. But in reality, there are suppliers that we have to deal with that don't have security plans. So we need one to give to them. And it's like, well, I wish you would have told us that when we started the project a year ago, but you're telling us now. So separately, we're going to do a new project where we're going to collaborate and come up with a very lightweight security plan where for some reason there's a vendor supplier we want to do business with. They don't have a security plan and they need one. So we'll have a lightweight security plan that we can give to a vendor and say, in this low risk, emphasize low risk scenario, if you do this, we're happy. Right? So we'll work that together. I need volunteers to do that. So San Francisco is going to lead technically. I'll project manage, but we need more voices. So that's coming. Schedule, we don't have a schedule for that yet because I got to get this one done before I take on another one. All right. So with that, we have time for questions. So yes.
You do contract renewals. We've been asking the ones I work with, to re-sign the most updated Appendix DS. So now that we have that, some of them have signed that longer one.
Right.
And so if we do that again, then we have to make sure that they've signed update the other terms and conditions.
Correct. So that's a great question, actually, and it's sort of hidden in the content we reviewed, but it's very important. You can't add the new DS to the old terms and conditions because they don't fit, right? So it's the whole package. So and Tom touched on this. So before, to Appendix DS, we bolted on GDPR. Right, we bolt on the BAA, so all that stuff now stands alone, and it's a whole new package. So locations, system-wide agreements, we're going to move to the new stuff. Location-based stuff, you're going to have to make a decision. So we encourage, based on risk, right, and resources, to move to the new package, right, where it makes sense. You shouldn't let things automatically renew. You should update to the latest, particularly where there's risk. So that's a great question. Did I answer it completely? Yeah. So yeah.
Just comment. We haven't really talked through this. That would probably be part of the training guidance.
Right.
But my thought would be certainly as things expire and you have to do something new, I mean, for sure, use the new package. At the moment, I don't envision going retroactive on it.
Correct.
Yeah. To try and change that.
Right.
You know, sometimes you got some evergreen things and it's time for a refresh anyway. So whenever those moments come, use the new one for sure. Right?
Yeah, so using the old DS will not be harmful. Is that really the? So if you've got an
if you're
already got an
in
old
progress
DS on
or
it,
whatever,
renewing the contract, you don't want to trash anything that you've already done.
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
my advice, right, it's a location decision. Where the risk is high, I would say you do want to move to the new approach. Where the risk is low, you can make a call based on resources. So, I encourage people to really look because, and let me tell you some proof points. All right. So the old stuff is scoped only to non-public information, right? So the supplier has no obligation to protect our stuff, people's privacy, the integrity of data, if it's in any way public, in any way, right? So when you think about that from today's blended threats and what threat actors are doing, supply chain compromise, if in any way it's public or inferred to be public, then the supplier has no obligation whatsoever, right? And so when you think about the interconnected way our world works, that's an unacceptably high risk I would advocate, right? We are seeing over and over and over again in higher education and in industry that they knock on the door, right? They look at the target. I know John, so I'm going to say, I want to get a John. But man, that guy is wickedly smart and he's capable, right? And it's going to take me a lot of work. But Ian, that solution architect at Berkeley, he was under a lot of time pressure and he cut all these corners. But you know what? He has a direct link to John, and John trusts Ian. Because Ian's a really nice guy. So
Big mistake.
I slipped something into Ian to get to John. And this isn't theoretical. I mean, if you're on the ITPS list, I'm sending this stuff out all the time, right? So this is really happening, and people have stuff we want. So, and that's actually a lead in. So I'm going to credit to UCLA to this. So UCLA came to me and said, when does DS apply? We are struggling with how to articulate it. So we spent the better part of an hour, actually just over an hour, trying to brainstorm. Like, how do we tell people simply when DS applies? So we came up with this simple formula. So first, the first question to ask is whoever gave us the stuff, professor, student, alumni, corporate partner, government, do they expect us to protect it? Yes or no? So if the answer is yes, then we ask the second question. Do we expect the supplier to participate in the protection? The answer is yes or no. If the answer is yes to the first question, so people expect us to protect it, and then we expect the supplier to participate, then you need DS, right? If you can legitimately say no, then you don't need it. Or if you can say yes and then no, right? So yes, people expect us to protect it, but no, the supplier plays no role, then you don't need DS. You only need DS when you have yes and yes.
So using that logic, if you were using a service in which you use an encrypted container, such that the vendor has no access to that encrypted data, then you wouldn't do DS.
Well,
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, because
maybe
it could become unavailable, at which point, that would be a big problem. So, there's the P level and the A level in IS3. So, and that would be an incident of itself if something, became unavailable.
Right, and this is an important,
Yeah.
I'll come back to you. So this is an important concept. So in the past, not just UC, but many people equated protection to confidentiality, right? And that doesn't make sense in today's world, right? So we are protecting confidentiality, but we're protecting privacy, which isn't necessarily confidential, could be. We're also protecting availability. We're also protecting integrity. Right? And so the loss of the stuff could be a huge concern, in which case you need DS, right? So protection does not equal confidentiality. And it is all of those properties. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And there's also things, so this doesn't deal with privacy, but privacy is a nuanced thing, right? So I can collect public information about you, right? And create a picture and a profile to you that's terrifying, or not to you, about you. And then if I share that public information, right, that most of us, I'm one of those people like, this is creepy, and I don't consent. I'm not down with somebody aggregating that information and saying, here's the stuff Robert does, right? And we're still wrestling with this. And then the other thing too we have to consider, right, is that if the supplier has an interface into us, like it's an attack vector, like the bad guy can come in that door, right? So I can come in to get to John. It's John I want to protect. I actually not that interested in Ian, except he's a vector to John, right? And so these things are important. So we have to look at the supplier relationship. He's hungry. It's lunchtime.
We are between everyone and lunch, rather.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're at the end of our allotted time, but there's one more question. Let me take that one.
I think you touched on it a little bit. Let's say a vendor is using something like GitHub in order to push code into your system. That's a potential insertion vector.
Right.
Does that fall within this as well, or is that something?
Right, and this is where you would look at the vendor security plan and say so using GitHub makes sense, right? So, but there's a risk vector, right? And so what does the vendor do? What's its configuration management practice to mitigate the risk to UC, if we care, right? And so this is where you look at the supplier's security plan and say, what are you doing to manage the risks that we care about? And good suppliers should have answers to these things, right? They should be thinking about them. If they say, well, what do you mean? Why is GitHub a risk? Well, that's right. That should be a concern. So anyway, then, because we're at the end of our time, I just want to say, so finally, right at the end of the day, the IS3 gives the CISO the ability to approve an equivalent, right? Now, so that gives the CISO a lot of power, right? But the CISO is then saying, I'm approving the equivalent and I accept the risk. So we have two CISOs here, right? So what I know from other IS3 features, by the way, I have a presentation this afternoon talking about those other features, right? CISOs are going to be hesitant to do that because when they step forward and say, I approve, they also say, I accept the risk, right? Now they may get a business partner to participate in that, right? But DS was built to lay out a framework that manages cyber risk, but it's completely scalable. And Jeremy, the CISO at Berkeley, and Allison's on his team. So he said, hey, I have scarce resources. So I am going to focus my scarce resources on P3 and P4 information. I'm going to train units to handle P1 and P2. And I am, as a system-wide or a location-wide office, I'm not going to worry about the lower risk stuff. I'm going to focus my scarce resources on the high risk. And now the CISO can do that. So they could approve a lighter weight or approve units negotiating within the checklists and the tools that we give them. We're out of time. I hope your time was valuable.
One parting thing that I forgot to mention earlier, just, I'm really pleased with the outcome of this project, but the kind of component that I think is overlooked is how so many groups of partners get to that outcome. You saw the executive sponsors, legal, security, procurement, but there were a lot of people involved, and it built a lot of muscles of everyone working together system-wide for a greater good. It's just been a wonderful thing.
All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.